Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for Sunday, October 27th. First, we'll look at the significant wave height chart for the North Pacific. Current data as of 18Z on Sunday. We see remnants of what was a gale over the dateline, more low pressure energy radiating towards the dateline of tropical origins, the first one here. And the second one is more just cold core low. And hurricane, or what was Hurricane Raymond, now lingering and fading south of Baja. First, let's examine winds at the jet stream level. We actually have a pretty healthy flow here with 140 knot winds pushing off Japan, ridging somewhat just west of the dateline, falling into a steep, almost pinched off trough here with 130 knot winds blowing into it. That is somewhat promising, but kind of on the downside here, we have much stronger winds, 180 knots, ridging up the east side of it, forming a big ridge here over the Gulf of Alaska. This supports high pressure in the Gulf, and then you got something that almost looks like a backdoor trough here trying to form off of Central California. That would usher in cold air into this area, and that's exactly what's happening now down at the surface. This trough here would support low pressure, but it's almost too pinched off, can't do much anything, and again you have a ridge over here in the west that supports high pressure. Let's put this into motion, see what's going to happen over the next couple of days. It all basically falls apart. You get this kind of almost a zonal flow, a flat flow, a little bit of a trough here on the dateline, but it's not real deep, not a lot of wind supporting it, and then that big ridge, thank goodness, over here in the Gulf of Alaska is moving inland, the backdoor trough moving out too. We'll put this into motion here. That was as of Tuesday night. You get a little bit more development here in the trough by late Wednesday, but not a whole lot, and it just kind of all washes out. Then this is a trough of sorts, not piles of wind feeding into it. It's just the angle of it is more supportive of gale development than anything, but it quickly blows out of here. And then you're kind of left with this weak zonal kind of flat flow across. And again, this is something that's almost a trough. This is almost a little troubling here. Almost a split flow coming on, getting ready to set up off Siberia, but not strong enough to be of too much concern yet. The good thing here is the general flow is pretty far to the south, down at 35 off of Japan. That's winter-like positioning, and the big ridge that was in the east is mellowing out a little bit, so nothing spectacular in any of this, but it appears to be trying to move in the right direction. Next, let's examine surface level winds and pressure. So we saw two areas of seas on the initial significant wave height chart. These are caused by this, actually almost looks like one consolidated gale. It's actually, this pocket of wind here is the remnants of Typhoon Lakima and Francisco, extratropical and totally falling apart, just basically a gale of sorts. And then another low forming back behind it, again both with 35 knot winds, nothing exceptional, moving towards the dateline. You got this kind of wall of wind, south wind energy here, mainly created between the gradient between generalized low pressure over a good part of the North Pacific and high pressure that's just been locked over the East Pacific. Okay, let's put this into motion, see what happens. You see, as these fetch areas move towards the dateline, they start falling apart. Winds never exceed 35 knots, and it just sort of degrades into nothing. High pressure off of California, a weak trade flow over Hawaii. High pressure, look at this, two high pressures now over the East Pacific. Again, a new low forming. This is as of Thursday, 45 knot winds approaching the dateline. That's somewhat promising, but then it too starts lifting north. Still 45 knot northwest winds, aimed pretty well at the Great Circle Pass towards Hawaii. Not horrendous, and it lifts north, and next thing you know, by Friday afternoon, it's just about in the Bering Sea. Still 40 knot fetch under the Aleutians, aimed well up the Great Circle Paths at the U.S. West Coast. That all moves north, and it's all in the Bering Sea, and it ends. You got strong high pressure over the eastern
Pacific and the local gradient setting up here off California. Let's go back and look at one little thing. This little low has been scheduled to form off of Oregon here now later Friday. It doesn't look as good as it did earlier. It's got still 40 knot north winds forecast for just a smidgen of time, but it quickly moves inland by Saturday morning and is gone, and basically it looks like a front just kind of sets a high pressure clearing front, moves through, and that's the end of it. Wind event probably for California. Trades pick up also for Hawaii, all driven by high pressure here and clockwise circulation around it. And then you're out of the end of the model and you're a week out. So now we're back to the surface level significant wave height chart. We're back to Thursday of last week, the 24th of October. Typhoon Lakima south of Japan. Remnants of Francisco south of Japan. A little tiny low that formed 26-foot seas on Thursday up in the Gulf, just barely shy of the Aleutians, and a local low that was off of California. Swell from this little system now is starting to impact California. I mean, this is a small thing, 3 feet at 13 seconds sort of thing, only at exposed breaks north of Point Conception. So not a big deal. Put it into motion, just see what happens here. So there's this next low that formed on the date line, got 20-foot seas aimed at Hawaii for a little bit, but it quickly fell apart, and that was like on Friday. On Saturday, you got a secondary fetch of about 22-foot seas. This is all making swell that's going to be pushing into Hawaii for the early part of the week. Nothing too big, but something rideable. Now I'm going to go back a little bit. Notice this Francisco Lakima situation. The two lows start merging, and you get this. Go back here. You got almost 40-foot seas here on early Saturday morning, late Friday night. I'm going to do the Great Circle Pass for Hawaii. It's traveling this direction, a bit across the grain relative to the pass into Hawaii, but not horrible, so some energy there. And then relative to California, you see a much more direct path going right up the like 296, 297 degree path. But the other issue, it's exceedingly far away. But interesting. Let's see how this plays out. We'll put it into motion. And quickly that thing like dissipated here Saturday night. It turned extra tropical, and you end up instead with 20, 22, 24, 26-foot seas and on a more direct path into Hawaii now. We'll put this into motion. You can see it actually almost falling more down, right down into Hawaii with the second fetch, again with 26-foot seas. Follow right up behind it. That'll set up swell mainly for Hawaii because of its close proximity for the mid part of the week. Relative to Hawaii, I'm going to go back and redo the same thing. You also get a pretty decent. It's sort of moving a bit south of the Great Circle Pass into California, but again, some swell should result from that. Nothing too exceptional. Okay, then we'll continue the rollout here. We're now into Tuesday of next week, and that up in the Gulf is beyond even California. Here's this new system that's scheduled west of the dateline on Thursday. We'll start that up again. Small system, you get 30-foot seas. Never much exceeds that, but here again, you get the situation where it's pretty much going across the Great Circle paths to Hawaii, heading up northeast, whereas if you look at California, it's more coming right up the paths to California. We put it into motion. It gets up, goes like many systems this year, hits big high pressure here, it gets driven northeast. It's up into the Aleutians and heading for the Bering Sea by Saturday of next week. We'll see what really happens. Anyway, beyond that, it just all sort of peters out, and then there's nothing going on. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We have this tropical system pushing swell towards Hawaii, and maybe some other system. It's still 6 days out, so who knows if it's even going to form at all. And then more pushing swell over towards the U.S. West Coast than Hawaii, but still, if it happens, some solid rideable, longer period swell could result.
We'll take a real quick look now at the longer term trends driven by the MJO, El Nino, La Nina sort of patterns. Looking at the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Australia and Tahiti, we're down at minus 27. We've actually had a pretty good little run of negative numbers. These past 3 days are the best of it. Haven't seen this in a while, which is good. It's not significant really, but it has driven the 30-day average down to effectively neutral, which is nice, and it's driving the 90-day average almost down to neutral too. This is good news in the short term. This sort of a pattern is indicative of the active phase of the MJO, which tends to support storm development in the northern hemisphere. So looking at the 30-day average over the past 2+ years, here's where we are, almost dead neutral. We're in the active phase, but notice even last year when the active phase was really going, it was down much lower than where we are. If you drew a line through this, the trend is still almost going upwards towards La Nina rather than down towards El Nino. But the other side is the peaks aren't up where we were there either, so the whole balance of the equation is more just driving towards neutral or just slightly above neutral, and that's not really great for storm development. You want to be down in the negatives if you want to see a lot of storm development. If you're up in the positives, you're into a high pressure regime or maybe small intense peaks of activity between longer stretches of high pressure. This is just sort of in no man's land, and the storm pattern kind of reflects that right now. Doing a quick look at surface wind anomalies in the West Pacific, we have just a little bit of some west anomalies there over the maritime continent. Neutral anomalies on the dateline. We'll scroll this up, go west of there, and basically neutral the rest of the way across the Pacific. So this is the west anomalies here in the West Pacific are indicative of the active phase of the MJO, but these are extremely weak. It's not even, doesn't qualify for a westerly wind burst. It's just sort of a general tendency. That's certainly better than easterly anomalies, but nothing great. A week out, the pattern switches a little bit, and you start getting weak easterly anomalies over the dateline and basically neutral here. All this is sort of still suggestive of just basically a neutral pattern. And let's go, and then you get over into the East Pacific and you see west anomalies here. So this is indicative of the MJO, the active phase of the MJO. It typically travels west to east on the equator, and it is here in the East Pacific getting ready to exit out. And the neutral anomalies over in the over here are sort of suggestive of not the inactive phase, but just a neutral phase. So the active phase moving out and a neutral phase moving in. We have two models we'll look at, see what they predict about the MJO, and basically this model, the statistic model, is showing nothing, dead neutral, sort of where we've been. Where the dynamic model is showing the inactive phase. This is a lot outgoing long wave radiation, showing a lot of reflectivity, low cloud cover, a lot of sun bouncing off the ocean, and that's typical of high pressure in the inactive phase of the MJO. So there's no consensus amongst these two models, and it's anyone's guess what's going to happen. But either way, for the next 5 days, I would say it's generally neutral pattern setting up, and that's kind of what the other model suggests. So that's kind of it forecast-wise there. And finally, one look at sea surface temperature variations. You see basically a neutral pattern over the equator here in the Pacific. Same deal over in the Atlantic. A little bit of outflow coming off of Peru and Chile, not significant, no real cold pockets here, no real cold pockets of water here. If anything, this area has been warming up. And the same thing here, pretty warm, neutral-ish, not a big deal. There's this flow of warm water that's been steadily for months now, working its way towards California. impacted for a little bit, it's backed off. You get this sort of persistent high pressure thing going on along the coast, creating some upwelling, and you see this, here's the high pressure. It would be like this. You get this cold upwelling going here, but not into Hawaii. Trades are actually pretty light now. Nothing significant, just not enough to make it particularly warm north of Point Conception. And basically, so far, no El Nino, no La Nina, just kind of in the middle. So this is actually good coming compared to where we've been. It's been cold water, high pressure for 2-3 years now, so we're on the road to recovery, and that's a good thing. So to wrap things up real quick, we have some gale development West Pacific, capable of generating 14-15 second period swell. This seems pretty likely. Hawaii will probably get the best of it. A little dribbles into California, rideable for sure, but nothing great. And then maybe something better out in the future here, if you believe the models, over towards the date line come the later part of the later part of the work week into next weekend, but that's too far off to be for sure. So we're continuing on in sort of a small wave pattern for now. Nothing massive showing, but it's not completely flat either. It's just kind of a weak swell pattern for this time of year. Normally we expect more, but at least it isn't flat. So that's pretty much it. So that sort of wraps it up for this week. We hope you've enjoyed the forecast. We're hoping for bigger surf, but as of right now, we're not seeing it. But at least it's not dead flat either. There's some potential out there. Enough to keep us in the water, catching some waves, having a good time, and try to stay tuned up for something bigger later in the winter, because we suspect the trend is going to be improving, but it's just going to take a while. Most of the energy is going to come later in the winter. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week.